Hello and welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. It is a pleasure to have Tzakhi Freedman here with us today, co-founder and CEO of Native Lead. Tzakhi, thanks for joining us. Excited to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here. Thanks a lot.
And Tzakhi, I know you've worked in the space for a while, first as a founder with Crowdfunding Guide, and now with your focus on Native Lead. Wanted to talk about what you guys are doing there in terms of investor lead generation, but want to start with your story, your background in getting into the crowdfunding space.
Okay, sure. I won't tell my whole story.
Of course,
because I'm 45 and there's quite a bit of it for now. But let's just start with how I got into crowdfunding. So 2020, when the Corona crisis broke in, so me and my partner at the time, we were thinking about how to jumpstart a new business with the whole world changing around us, and we got very excited about equity crowdfunding. And it actually started picking up a little bit in Israel, but we started looking at what's going on, especially in the US. And then we founded Crowdfunding Guide, which didn't pick up as we wanted it to in many ways, but it did become, I think, a very well-positioned website providing information about the crowdfunding space. So at first we were kind of thinking of it as another platform. Then we had various ideas around it. In the end, it's really just an information website. I don't own it anymore. Just kind of swapped hands on that. But what we did learn with Crowdfunding Guide is how to reach out to investors, because that was part of what we were trying to do. At some point, we're trying to build a marketplace for investors and startups. So we really learned how to reach out to investors. That became a service that we offered crowdfunding startups. And by then, we also had relationships with people in the crowdfunding world, with platforms. So that also helped us get our first clients. And that's how Native Lead, which is really a lead generation agency that specializes in LinkedIn, has a very strong hold in the crowdfunding space, because we work with lots of crowdfunding startups. Definitely not only, we have lots of other clients. We do like to work with startups in general, not only startups, but almost only startups. But a good share of our clients are from the crowdfunding space. So because of our experience in Crowdfunding Guide, kind of know the pains and difficulties and timelines and what's on the mind of the founders when they're in the crowdfunding space.
Excellent. So being able to use direct outreach via LinkedIn to identify, send an invitation, and message prospective investors to point at the offering, to point at the deal.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think Native Lead, I think maybe by now there's some other agencies that do similar stuff, but for quite a while, Native Lead was the only marketing agency that was trying to help startup founders that are in the equity crowdfunding space do something which is kind of almost against the whole idea of equity crowdfunding, which is reach out to accredited investors. So in equity crowdfunding, at least Reg CF startups have the option of reaching out to retail investors, and that's a lot of the story around equity crowdfunding, and especially around Reg CF is reaching out to retail investors. But our take was always that as you are reaching out to retail investors, whether it's on the major platforms or any other way, you also want to bring in the accredited investors. And actually, the conversation with accredited investors is something that a startup should be having all the time along the way, at least for the first few years of their existence. So our claim was, as you are reaching out with your marketing campaigns, and I don't know, maybe you have DNA helping you and you're running ads and you're doing all the things that you need to be doing to get retail investors, use us to connect directly with accredited investors and get them on board to kind of push your campaign forward, get their feedback, get their network, and all the things that come along with accredited angel investors.
Sure. Sure. Reg CF, Regulation Crowdfunding, Title III of the Jobs Act allows for both accredited and unaccredited retail and high net worth audiences. For anyone listening in, that's what we're referring to when we say accredited, typically over 200K individual income over the past 3 years, 350 household income, or $1 million net worth outside of their primary home. There's a list of other factors. The levels change, but that's who you're looking to reach. How are you reaching those individuals? How are you identifying them on LinkedIn?
First of all, awesome, Jason. Really, I love that was so quick. I just want to add to that I don't remember when exactly it was, but a few months ago there was an update to the regulations. Before that, it was kind of like a differentiation within the Reg CF campaign between accredited and non-accredited. Now both can invest through the same campaign. There really isn't a difference. Meaning, if you have a Reg CF campaign, you can accept any investor. But even before that, startup founders had usually alongside with the Reg CF, a Reg D, or some other vehicle where they could accept accredited investors. So reaching out to accredited investors was always a thing. Now, how to find accredited investors is really a challenge. There are lots of challenges around it. First of all, accredited investors can be also institutional investors, but we're not talking about those. We're talking about individual angel investors. And when a startup is in a equity crowdfunding campaign, they want to get results fairly quickly. They don't have time to go meet a VC and go for several months of due diligence before that VC takes a call. So they don't want to talk to VCs, not for the current round. They might want to talk to VCs for their next round or just in general, but they don't want it for the immediate campaign that they're in. So one thing is to identify angel investors that are actually not VCs. And a lot of them are, or they're somewhere on the border between being part of a venture capital fund or other institution and being individual. Like a lot of them are venture partners in a venture capital fund. So that's one distinction. Another distinction is that a lot of accredited angel investors are people that maybe they've been part of a startup that's exited. Maybe they've been some part of an investment group or VC, and they've stopped working there, or the fund has dissolved. Now they have time, and they often offer a lot of services like consulting, etc. Not in itself a bad thing. Often it's a great thing because they can offer a lot of value. These are people with experience, but it's very important to distinguish between people that are mostly keen on investing, and that's their main agenda, and people that are mostly keen on providing various services, which is something else. So again, founders that are in a campaign are in a rush, and they don't want to start meeting a lot of people and have conversations which are not about getting a check. So sure. It's very important to kind of make that kind of distinction. And of course, another issue is that people don't always give public notice of where they invest and what they invest. So we can't see all the investors in the world. We can only see those that made it public, because we're only looking at public information. We're looking at Crunchbase, we're looking at AngelList, we're looking at mainly on LinkedIn. And maybe you mentioned that maybe in the end we'll talk about a little bit about like what advice we can give founders, how they can help themselves promote their campaigns. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about what to look at exactly on a LinkedIn profile, and what are the things that would be the best way to identify that someone is an investor that's worth reaching out to.
Sure.
And one more point, of course, you want to reach out to. Yeah, sorry. One more point is that we want to reach out to investors that are relevant. So it's, if someone has been investing all their lives in biomed, and now you're reaching out to them with startup and e-commerce, they're not going to respond. They'll probably even get a bit annoyed. So there's a lot to check, like a lot to look at, a lot of research to do. And only when you do the research right will it ever work. If you're reaching out to people that are not relevant, then you're not doing cold outreach. You're doing something which is closer to spam. So it's very important to be very accurate in who we are researching and who we're targeting and who we're reaching out to.
So that's a great tip alone right there. What you're saying is, yes, we do outreach on LinkedIn, which I love, by the way. There's something about seeing someone's profile picture, their mutual connections, their background, that just leads to higher response rates than cold email. I'm from the days where there was still cold calling and knocking on doors and direct mail, what have you, all different types of outreach tactics. We're typically seeing 20% or higher acceptance rates. And then if you're messaging, 20% higher response rates is a good goal. So I love LinkedIn. And what you're saying is don't only use LinkedIn's search filters. Yes, you can look at job titles, and I'm always amazed by how many people put the word investor as a job title, and even industry specific. Don't only use geolocation, second connection, all these things that you could put in there, but do research Crunchbase, research AngelList, Signal, whatever it may be.
Right.
Do your due diligence. Then as you're putting together this ideal list, this prospect list, wish list, hit list, take your pick, then you're taking it over to LinkedIn and doing the outreach. Because as you're saying, without the right research, you'd be reaching out to the wrong folks, and it's just a waste of time for everybody.
Yeah, I'll add a few things to that. So, well, there's a whole rant that I can get into about LinkedIn outreach in general and who should be using it and why. But if we're still focused on the question of angel investors, so they're a very particular group, which is problematic to reach out to in any other way, because cold email, for instance, which has a lot of problems in itself, but lots of people use it for various purposes successfully, is specifically very difficult to use with angel investors because you can't reach out to someone on their Gmail, right? You need to reach out to them on a company email, otherwise you're violating, I'm pretty sure, I've never done it, but you're violating various regulations, GDPR, whatever. So you want to reach out on company email, and you don't know which company email the person is using, because if it's a proper angel investor, they're on boards of several companies, they have their own company, they have their own maybe venture, small VC that they operate, or a family office. And all of these have different domains, and you don't know which one of them is their email. It's very difficult to get a proper email list for angel investors, as far as I know. Second is that angel investors are actually quite open to get pitched, and they like when investors connect to them, given, of course, that it's well targeted, meaning that the startup is a good fit for what the angel is actually interested in. So if it's an angel that's been investing in AI in the media space, and that's a startup from that space that's reaching out, they'll listen and they'll ask for the deck because it's interesting for them. It doesn't mean that they'll invest, of course, but they will listen and they will respond positively. So LinkedIn is I think the most effective way to reach out at scale to angel investors.
Excellent. So do the research, use LinkedIn, don't play around with other channels. I mentioned some acceptance rates and response rates that I've looked at. Are those in line with what you're seeing? How many invitations are you sending per day, or would you recommend for founders to use? What are some good numbers? I'm big on numbers. It's only way to measure, right? So if we had a listener reach out to a few people once and say that LinkedIn didn't work, I would tell them they're selling their brand short. Where if they're hitting the daily cap every day, every business day for the course of 3 months, they're just naturally going to see better results. What are some numbers that you throw at it to make sure that Native Lead is doing a good job, or to paint the picture for a founder in terms of what's required?
Okay, we set the bar for accepting connection requests at 30%. It could be higher, but we really don't like to go lower.
Yep.
If it's lower, we're kind of concerned. A very important thing to check, besides checking all the things that I mentioned about the relevance of the person that you're reaching out to, is whether the person is actually active on LinkedIn. It's a kind of very simple thing to check. You can just look it up. LinkedIn, every profile has activity, and you can just check what the person did. And if you see that the person had no activity and has a profile that doesn't look updated, and there are other, signals of that, they're not going to respond, even if you're, offering them a pot of gold. They're just not going to respond because they're not on the platform. They might have a profile, but they're not on the platform. So that's a very simple thing to improve acceptance rate. Now, in terms of response rate, it really varies. Like, we've had startups with amazing response rate. We've had startups where people don't respond very positively. It kind of varies from what, startups are, it's a whole world of, it's like different people. You can't, everyone's different, and what they have to offer is different. And, you can't compare a startup that has impressive investors and some traction and revenues and an all-star team with a startup that's just getting started and doesn't have a lot to show for it. It's really, you can't really compare them in terms of what kind of response they will get, but at least they will get connected, and at least they will get responses that are adequate to what they are in the world. In terms of how much outreach you can do, LinkedIn has, I think it's like an unofficial cap of 100 connection requests a week. And it's better not to try to press against the limits, but stay below the limits. And really, the emphasis should be on quality and not on quantity. So the maximum quantity would be maybe 350 connection requests. You can do emails. Lots of people have an option to receive an email from anyone. Like, if you have a premium account, I think it's by default, but if not by default, then most people have the option that they're willing to receive an email from anyone. And you can use that. You can send, I think, about 20 a day of emails to people that have open emails. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if many people are doing that right now. What you're saying is, as you're going through this list, if they have opted to receive in-mail, you can actually send them an in-mail message without counting towards that 100 per week that you're talking about for regular invitations, and without an additional cost, without something you would have to be part of a paid program such as Sales Navigator to receive any volumes of.
Yeah, I think people don't respond to emails as good as they do to a connection request. Mm-hmm. But it's just a way to add some outreach if that's, if there's like pressure to try to do as much as possible. But again, I think the best kind of way to think about it is to focus mostly on quality as opposed to quantity. When it comes to, you can increase the quantity by adding more profiles that are relevant. But again, this is another point that maybe we should touch upon, is that good response rate is also related to a good profile. So the profile has to be well set, but it also has to be of the right person. Usually the right person to reach out to investors is one of the founders, preferably the CEO. But it doesn't have to be only the CEO. But usually investors won't respond as well to someone that is like tagged as business development or some other title, which seems like they're just a step in the way from the CEO, because startups are small teams, so an investor wants to talk pretty quickly with the founders and preferably with the CEO.
Sure. From the founder CEO page, make sure the CEO's page looks good, authoritative, and checks the boxes that an investor may be asking themselves, and that in turn will create a higher response rate.
Yeah, it's actually not so hard to set up the profile. because I don't believe that people nowadays really go in depth into anything in the online world. It's just the way things are set up, that everyone's browsing and moving very quickly. So it's really important just to set up the things that are immediately visible, what's above the fold. So the profile picture, the headline, the background image, the about section, but really the first two sentences of the about section, because no one's going to go and read the whole Megillah that's in there. Just read the first two sentences. So it's not very hard to do, but it has to be done. Like if you don't do the setup of the profile properly, what we're doing with the profile, the logic that we have is you're saving time to the person you're reaching out to, making it easy for whoever you're reaching out to understand very quickly what you're about, why you've reached out to them, what is the connection here. So if you're a startup founder, your title should kind of speak the language of startups. Innovation, disruption, buzzwords, which maybe people are tired of, but these are like signals to the investor that, hey, this is a startup founder that's in the right space, that is doing something that I'm interested in. So the kind of just put the headline and make it attractive and relevant to investors. And then when you start reaching out, stop reaching out to investors, now you're reaching out in a business perspective and trying to do sales. Maybe you change your title, it's fine, but make it sound attractive to the investor that you're reaching out to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as you're doing so, what about response rates? What about follow-ups? How much needs to occur on average to get a result?
I'm not a big fan of too much follow-up. I think it's frustrating more than anything. And it also annoys people on the other side. So it's better to, I'd say 2-3 follow-ups. And the third follow-up is like maybe 2 weeks later, just to say, hey, things have been moving, just to kind of try that. Or a follow-up. Why? Because I'm thinking of the next round. So let's say an investor has accepted the connection request of the startup founder. They're in their network, they're following them, they're seeing their posts. Maybe they're not interested now, maybe it's too early for them. Who knows? Maybe 3 months from now, half a year from now, reach out again, and it's the right timing. So if you burn yourself out by following up 5-6 times, knocking on that person's door and they're not answering, and you're annoying them, and now you're tagged in their brain as a nuisance or a nudnik, that's not good. And it's better to keep it convenient and nice, so that if you want to reach out again, it doesn't feel like too much. It feels okay. So 2-3 follow-ups. Just the first message, which is a very brief pitch, very, very brief pitch, and not asking for anything, but
correct.
Is this interesting? Not trying to push for a meeting, not trying to push for investment, of course, it's crazy, but not trying to push for anything. Just ask, this is what we do. Is this interesting? If the person says yes, let me send you a deck. And this is I think for me, it's a very basic principle of marketing. I hope you agree, is that with every step, you're just trying to get to the next step. You're not trying to get to the end result. So first is just to try to get accepted, and then try to get the person interested. And then if the investor, he or she, is interested, then you try to ask them if they're willing to receive a deck, share their email, and then you take it from there, and you're trying to get it into a meeting. And again, even if the person does share their email, it's not, the instinct of a lot of founders is, oh, this person is interested. Here's all the information I can give you. Please, here's a 15-slide deck, and here's a white paper, and here's our patent filed, and a lot of information. And it's not the way to go. The way to go is to give basic information, which is enough for the investor to understand what you're about, and stay curious enough to want to meet you. And there you can say things in greater detail. So the sequence is connection request, if accepted, brief pitch asking for interest. If there's interest, would you like me to send you a deck? If yes, here's my email. What's your email, please? Send the email. The email is it contains a very brief, like 5-slide deck, and saying, happy to tell you more, show you our full deck. Let's schedule a call. And after the call is hopefully in the able hands of the founders.
I think that's a good funnel, and absolutely being able to use one stage of the funnel to get to the next. We look at a similar model where the first message is more conversational, like you said, no ask. The second message being more of a hook, third being an ask, and then fourth being conversational plus hook on message 2, third being an ask, and then fourth being a follow-up. So 2 to 3 follow-ups, 3 follow-ups from message 1. We have tried it where it's a total of 3 messages and a total of 4. For email, I usually do further volume. I use this breakdown of it shows how many people never follow up once, then how many never follow up twice, 3 times, and the drop-off rates. Meanwhile, most transactions occur somewhere between touch point 7 and 12. So I've always modeled off that. And you're right, it's difficult to make each message meaningful after message 3. So if there's one follow-up after message 3 and it's a total of 4 messages, 3 follow-ups as a whole, I think that's a good place. I do see groups that do more follow-ups, but each one is big. It's powerful. These are some of the top campaigns, and they're talking about this new event that they're doing, how they just passed 3 million, whatever it may be. So I have seen use cases of it. I also don't see too many investors follow up on the next round, a year later from earlier messages. But for me, it's a matter of making each message count, each message matter, whether it's 2, whether it's 4 total, what is standing those apart? What are you doing to put yourself in the shoes of the investor and write messaging that you're going to care about? Because it's not about the brand to the investor. It's about them. It's about their needs. It's about the liquidity. It's about something specific to this industry. You have to figure that out. We usually start with the marketing strategy first. But for those reasons, I really like what you're doing. I know a lot of groups are doing automated tools, but you guys are doing everything manually, making sure each page is vetted, each investor, as you mentioned, is a good fit. And if you're going after the wrong audience, you're annoying everybody. So I think that is what makes a big difference from native lead and what other groups are doing in-house, maybe using a tool.
Thanks, Jason. We do use some tools for some of the automation. I just want to say about what you said before. I think you're right that email kind of allows for more follow-up than LinkedIn. LinkedIn, for better or for worse, is more personal, and it feels more intrusive. So when it's a good fit, it's great. And when it's not, it's really annoying to people, and people kind of respond to it very powerfully. So on email, it's kind of, it feels more natural to keep following up. And I think people are also used to it. Like it's kind of become like a standard that, you get follow up, and it's the same. On LinkedIn, I don't think it works the same way. So I think on LinkedIn, if you follow up too much, it doesn't feel good. Like, I think people also remember that on LinkedIn, I think now they're trying to change that, but you only have one tab in the email. It's not like in your Gmail or other email providers. You have different tabs for promotions, for social, and you have the inbox, like the main tab. In LinkedIn, you just have one inbox, so everything goes in the same place. So that's why I don't like to follow up too much. Yes,
Sure.
2, 3 follow-ups. If the person is not responding, better to move on to the next person.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've already given
Yeah.
so many great tips, but for any listeners, for any founders that are tuning in, what do you want to point out for them to test? And, as we get into 2023 here, as we know the market's different than it was a year ago or even further back.
Okay, first of all, I think if you're a startup founder, um, and you're the kind of startup that is likely to be dependent on raising capital, you probably should be reaching out regularly to investors, even if you're not currently raising, because no matter what's happening, you want to build relationships, and also look at the people that you're reaching out to, the investors, not only through the prisma or prism. I'm not sure if I'm saying the right word in English. In Hebrew, we say prisma. Uh, Through the prism of
Yes.
prism. Yeah. Is that person going to write me a check or not? Because you might meet someone that's not willing to write you a check. Maybe they're not liquid at the moment, or they're not interested, or they're too risky for them, whatever. But if you maintain a good relationship with them, if it's a serious investor, they have good relationships with other investors. They might have relationships in the industry to help you with sales later on, business development. So it's really thinking on the longer term of building relationships and maintaining those relationships by creating a CRM, knowing who the people you've contacted, who's responded to you, following up after some time. Like we said, founders don't tend to do that. You're right, and it's a shame, it's a waste. If someone's connected with you, even if they haven't responded, but they've connected with you, they're in your network, they're somehow interested, it's a good idea to try to check in with them when you have something really new and important to tell them. Like now you have, your patent has been accepted, I don't know. You've just raised a lot of money. You're not asking them for anything, but you just let them know so that when you want to ask them for something, they'll be interested. So that's the first thing. If getting more into like the details of how to reach out to investors on LinkedIn, I would say set up your profile. Like I said, make it easy for them to understand who you are, what you're about. Check very carefully who you're reaching out to, and that the person that you're going to reach out to is actually interested in investing. Not everyone that has the word investor in their profile. Actually, I'd say most of the people that have the word investor in the profile just have it for various reasons, without getting into what the reasons are, but various people have the word investor all over, and it doesn't mean that they're investing. You have to see that they're actually invested in more than one startup, that they talk about investments, that they talk about startups, that they're interested. Like not that they've invested in, their cousin's startup 10 years ago and it's written investor in XXX startup. That doesn't mean that they're going to invest in you. It means that they invested in a startup a few years ago. But what we want is investors that are actually interested in investing. And third is to be very, I believe in being brief. I don't believe in too many niceties, like trying to say, hey, we went to the same university, or we both know somebody. These things are all, if you don't really know the person, and you don't really know that the investor or whoever you're reaching out to really knows the other person, just because you're both contacts on LinkedIn. I mean, I have 5,000 contacts on LinkedIn. I don't remember most of them by now. And so does a lot of people now. Like it's a very common thing. It's not unusual to have a few thousand connections on LinkedIn. No niceties, just not to be pushy, not to be rude, but also not to be respectful of the other person's time by letting them know why you're reaching out and not trying to kind of, circle around it because maybe you feel embarrassed about making an ask. Then you're starting to say things that are not really relevant. And what's happening is the other person knows that you're about to ask something and they're becoming nervous. So don't start a conversation with, how you're doing. I saw you posted about this. Nobody cares. get to the thing itself, and again, and not without asking for anything, just presenting yourself. Yeah, those are the main things that I would advise.
So let's say someone does the research and they find the right investors and they put together a list of 100 per week to reach out to per your recommendation. Less.
80 to 90 a week. Yeah.
They put together 80 to 90 a week. And they put together a good message one. They're getting a 30% acceptance rate or higher. They're removing the niceties in the messaging, but it's not working. They're not getting investors. They're not seeing individuals go from one stage of the funnel to the next, or perhaps they are, but just not that final stage of investment. How can they optimize? And I find more campaigns here than not. Even the ones that are doing great, at some point it slows down, it plateaus a bit. How can a group optimize to improve performance?
Okay. Yeah, very important question. And here we're getting into kind of, I think, deeper things. So look, basically it's a truth about any kind of thing that's related to marketing and sales. It's empathy. So a lot of times startup founders are like very focused on things that really matter to them and they think matter to everyone else. For instance, product and a feature and the problem they're solving, and are very enthusiastic about explaining why there's like a problem in the world or there's a pain point and how they're solving it. And that's not actually what very often investors are interested in hearing. They want to hear, this is like I'm talking about like the first message, the first very brief pitch. They just want to hear, even if they're not conscious about it, what they're looking is to get boxes ticked so that they know that this is a conversation worth having. Because at this point, they don't know anything about the startup. They get pitched by quite a few startups on LinkedIn daily. And they're, like I said, they're relatively interested, but they're interested if it's interesting. And how do they decide if it's interesting? They want to hear that certain boxes are being ticked. So think about the things that are important from the perspective of an investor. Investor, first of all, is looking at two things: opportunity versus risk. That's investment, right? Opportunity versus risk. So what are the things that can very quickly give an investor some assurance? And what are the things that can teach them about opportunity? This is actually something that we devised in Crowdfunding Guide. We called it the 5 startup strength indicators. So things, it's kind of not a very sexy name, too long, but the things that matter to investors and they want to hear them right out the bat. So do the startup founders have insignificant experience in the past? Like, do they have a past exit, or have they built something big, or is one of the founders like a past C executive in a, I don't know, Fortune 500 company? Okay. This is something that doesn't have to go in the pitch. This can go in the title of the person that's doing the outreach. So that's one. 2 is other investors and investments raised. Most investors are followers. They really want to hear who else invested in you. And if the answer is no one, that's going to be a problem for them. Or if there's no one important, that's also going to be a problem for them. 3 is traction. Like, do you have revenues? Do you have, I don't know, a partnership that's meaningful? Something to show that's actually happened. 4 is defensibility. Like, do you have IP, proprietary IP, something that differentiates you from the world, patents, whatever we can hold back. I mixed 4 and 5. So 4 is partnerships and 5 is revenues. But those things really come together. So traction. Those are the things that need to be. And of course, you need to show the opportunity. So maybe you want to say a sentence or half a sentence about the opportunity, the total addressable market, the kind of money that's flowing around in the space that you've entered as a startup, so that the investor has an opportunity. That's it. You don't have to describe your features. You don't have to get into like exactly what you do, where you are, what where you are in the journey, or how you got to this. Like it's very hard. I had a conversation with one of our copywriters, and this is something which I'm sure you've also encountered. She said, "Hey, it's much harder to write brief copy than longer copy. You have to really, really condense it." So that's the part where it's really challenging, putting together a very, very condensed description of yourself to make that is attractive to investors and make it sound attractive from the investor's perspective, not your story.
And I again like how you highlight that, because it's about that investor perspective. What have you seen towards scale? What have you seen the top campaigns do? How can you take this strategy? Now you've optimized, you're seeing performance, but you have $5 million to hit the full Reg CF cap based on your valuation and offering, or you're working on a Reg A plus and you have up to 75 million. How can you do this at a larger scale? I know you've talked about different caps involved. What have you seen the top campaigns do to utilize this type of outreach, this type of vehicle, and be able to do higher volume in terms of their raise?
So you're hitting on a point which is really problematic. You can't really reach a lot of scale in this way, because you want to reach out directly from personal profiles, and they have to be viable profiles of preferably founders or senior people in the team. And if the team is very small, there aren't many of those, and they have to be a good LinkedIn profile with enough connections to get started with. So it's hard to go to too much scale on this. Most startups don't want to go to crazy scale, because this whole strategy is set up to get calls, and there's a limit to how many calls you can take, unless you're set up for that with like a business development team, which then you have a bigger team and then you have more profiles. But yeah, it's limited by the number of profiles you can put to work. This isn't the right strategy for ads. For ads, running ads is something we can also talk about on how you run ads for something like this, which is a different strategy. So for this specific strategy, there's a limit on scale, but again, it kind of fits the needs of most startups in terms of like the scale that they want to reach and the number of meetings they're able to have during the week.
Mm-hmm. And we have seen, groups add more pages, so more LinkedIn pages, more folks on investor relations calls, what have you. But as you mentioned, limited scale. Although I've seen very large, investments come out of this. So
Right.
don't want to make it sound like it's less impactful than other channels. And I know you guys have been part of some very successful campaigns just in your case studies alone.
Yeah. Well, the upside is unlimited, because if you reach the right investor, you can have millions in investment. So it doesn't have to be, and compared to the cost, I mean, there's no ad spend here. So compared to the cost, the impact is really meaningful. Yeah. One thing that I do know that people do, and we strongly recommend not to do, and we never do, is setting up fake profiles and using them to reach out. I don't even know if that's legal, but I highly recommend for anyone not to do that. It's just bad karma.
I agree. There's something to be said, as we were mentioning earlier, about getting to know somebody quicker through their professional profile, such as LinkedIn. So to mess with that integrity, and more importantly, just to get a higher connection rate. I haven't seen anything using fake profiles, and I've seen it before.
It looks horrible. Yeah, it looks horrible. It feels horrible. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes against the whole idea of building relationships. So I think, like, again, if you're doing a good campaign with our method, I hope you get great results for your immediate campaign, but you're also getting a lot of value going forward, and you're building your network with really high value people, and that's something very important. And I think it's very important to value that and not just like see. I don't think it's a good mindset also to see like the investors as a kind of like a commodity. It's better to see them as people that you're adding to your network and going to stay in touch with over the next few years, hopefully. So,
Absolutely. And I could tell you, you know, for a lot of our experience, I do this firsthand for partnership development and have seen amazing relationships come out of it that have given us business for 6 years, longer in some cases. You can have real relationships. It's not just about the business. I've been able to work on content collaborations, been able to organize with conference organizers. There are so many ways that I consider LinkedIn outreach to be underrated. So the fact that you're focusing on this, the fact that you're doing it well and providing this value for clients is huge. And I really appreciate you coming on to break this down a bit. As we begin to wrap up the episode, and I feel like I talked to you for hours here, work in this exact same area for investor acquisition. I absolutely could continue with my applause. Just knowing some of the groups you've worked with directly and firsthand. What message would you like to leave listeners with? And what is the best way for them to get in contact with you to continue the conversation?
Okay, well, since we're mostly in the crowdfunding space, so I guess a lot of our listeners are startup founders. So my main message to you is build your network. You can use LinkedIn, use your personal network for intros, but also use LinkedIn to build your network into new people, and do that regularly and way ahead of your campaign, so that you have a lot of relationships that you can bank on when you need them, when you have a campaign, and also for your next rounds. Like, think not long term in terms of 100 years forward, but even just a few years forward, and have that intention. How to reach us at nativelead.io is our website. Reach out to me directly on my LinkedIn profile or our LinkedIn page. What I'm working on now is a series of tutorials to help startup founders if they want to get started on their own, how to reach out on LinkedIn, how to set their profile, a lot of the things that we touched upon. So hopefully that'll be out, I don't know, coming weeks, start coming out in the coming weeks. And that I hope will provide a lot of value for startup founders. So check out our website and check out our LinkedIn page, and you'll find those things.
Excellent. And highly recommend that listeners do. And take Tzakhi up on his invite and, get in contact, learn more, brainstorm. I know you're always a wealth of information in our discussions. So definitely back that web search and getting in contact. And Tzakhi, I want to thank you so much for logging in. I know you're overseas. It's later at night here. Really a pleasure speaking with you and having you here on the show.
Thanks, Jason. It's been a pleasure, and I always enjoy talking to you, man. And let's be in touch. Let's meet again soon.
Let's do it. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Again, recommend you checking out nativelead.io, and we'll see you next time. Take care.